Our second objective is to build an understanding of the different types of scientific communications. So social work researchers rely on specific methods for conducting the research. And when the research, we have final products that we make available to the scientific community. And those products are ways of sharing the results of our studies. And so we've got very specific ways of communicating those results. And when you have an understanding of how the results are communicated, that's going to allow you to get at that information much more efficiently and become better consumers. So scientific journals are the primary vehicle for scientific communication. Scientific journals can look like magazines where it shares the information about a certain topic, but they're really much different. Scientific journals have certain characteristics that really make them unique, and having an awareness of what a scientific journal is the basis for getting at what is considered empirical social work research. Scientific journals are distinct from magazines, and the major distinction is that the content of the journals are go through a process of what is called peer review. So scientific journals are really collections of peer-reviewed research. And in the picture that you see here, we have somebody at a protest who's holding a sign saying, "In peer review, we trust." And this person is really making the statement that we want our results to go through this process of what we consider peer review, which is considered scientific gatekeeping. It's a way of making our results and our methods of our science open to the scientific community to be scrutinized, to be carefully reviewed, that we want to make sure that the science that we're producing becomes part of a public good, and that the research is ethical, that it follows sound scientific principles, and is communicated in a way that we could add it to the scientific literature and build our knowledge in a systematic way. We've got different types of social work journals, and I'm going to give you just a few examples. And in the resources folder for this course, you will find an exhaustive list of social work journal topics, titles that you will be reviewing as part of your assignment. But here are a few examples of social work journals that are considered generalist journals. And generalist journals publish topics on a wide area of social work topics. So they're not really organized around a specific theme, but they reflect social work issues in general. So we have the journal called Social Work, Research on Social Work Practice, Journal of the Society for Social Work and Research, the British Journal of Social Work, and Social Service Review. Again, these are just a few of the generalist social work journals in the field, and by no means is this a comprehensive list. Some of the journals can follow a specific theme, and we consider these to be specialty social work journals. For example, Social Work Education is a journal that's going to focus on education issues in social work. So this might be examining particular pedagogy within social work education and a policy issue related to social work education. But the idea is that the themes and the content within the journal are oriented around social work education. As another example, Social Work Practice and the Addictions focuses on substance use disorders. Qualitative Social Work publishes content that relies on qualitative methodologies. And so you have the idea of these specialty journals based on the topic, based on the title that they're given. We also have allied journals. So these are journals that are not specific to social work, but this goes back to the idea where social work research is informed by many of the other social sciences. So we can contribute to the social sciences and be informed by these. And so we have many journals outside of social work that we still rely on, that we consider to be very relevant to the field. Here are just 5 examples of allied journals. But again, we've got many, many other journals. And some of these journals, we've tried to provide a very comprehensive list for you. But we're going to certainly miss other areas because social work is really a very diverse and complex field. So we have many different journals that are relevant to the work that we do. So let's talk briefly about the peer review process, because this is what we consider to be the backbone of science for ensuring that our methods are sound. And this is what really makes it a social work journal distinct from other magazines and other types of print material and electronic material that are not peer-reviewed. So when a social work researcher conducts a study, they will go through all the variety of processes to study a given social phenomenon. And then the study has to be communicated in some fashion. So they write up a manuscript in a very structured manner. And so the manuscript is essentially an article that describes the study that's being conducted. And after they have authored this manuscript, they find a journal that is relevant to the topic areas. So it could be a specialty journal or it could be a generalist journal. So they've got many different decisions. The journal receives it, and every journal is managed by a journal editor. And the journal editor will give a preliminary review of the manuscript and decide whether or not it's something that the journal will consider publishing. Some manuscripts are determined they're not appropriate or they're not of sound value, so they're going to be excluded from the process immediately. The works that are considered relevant for the journal are then subjected to the peer review process. So the journal editor sends the manuscript to a number of experts within the field. 3 experts will review this manuscript, and they'll do a very, very careful review of the study. They'll be looking at the rationale for the study, the ethics behind the study, the specific methods that were used, the analysis that were performed, and the implications of it, what knowledge is actually produced from the study. And they'll make recommendations to the editor of whether or not this is something that should be published. Sometimes the manuscript may have to go through a few revisions before it can be published, or the reviewers may suggest to the editor that the manuscript is rejected and not published. So the editor has a very important job of taking these recommendations from the expert reviewers to make a decision of whether or not to publish the article. And finally, the author is informed of the decision. So again, the idea of the peer review process is that everything is subjected to expert review within the field, and experts help inform the decision of whether or not this is something that should be made available. This process is much different than how a magazine will operate, where the magazine is really interested in whether or not this is something that's going to be of interest to a readership and be driven more by a business decision rather than the quality of the study itself. But this isn't a perfect system, and this researchers who are involved in conducting social work research know the limitations very well. But it is the best system that we have right now, and it is probably going to be a system that's going to remain for a very long time. So let's just highlight a few problems that we know go along with this process. Foremost, it can be slow. And that's why we don't see innovations happen at a very rapid pace. It takes a long time to prepare a manuscript for publication, but as we've observed in the previous diagram, that the manuscript changes hands many times, and sometimes it's not very fast in how the work is actually done. The work is reviewed by reviewers within the field, a couple experts, but the process may not actually select the best science. We've got many examples within science where a manuscript has been rejected many times before it is published, only to find out that it has had an enormous and important impact on the field. Reviewers may not provide a high-quality review. The reviewers who do these expert reviews are not directly compensated or incentivized for this work. This is sort of a service to the scientific enterprise, and it's something that it's expected to do of a scholar or a scientist. But we've got many competing demands in our work, and unfortunately, these competing demands do take away from performing quality reviews. Sometimes reviewers may disagree in their reviews, and so the editor is provided with a very difficult job of how do they resolve the disagreements on whether or not something with the study needs to be fixed or whether or not to even publish the article. And finally, reviewers can have their own biases, and these biases can have significant influences on whether or not a study is published. When you open up a journal, you'll find many different types of articles, but not all of the articles are empirical articles. Empirical articles are original forms of research. And we've got other types of scientific communication that help advance the scientific research but are not considered empirical. So I just want to take a moment to point out a few different types of journal articles that you can find in a journal and how these differ from what are considered to be empirical research. The first one will be an editorial or position paper. It's very common to find this as the first article in a journal. An editorial can be a way of introducing a journal, the journal issue itself, a way of organizing the content that is published in that particular issue. It can also be a short or extended commentary on a given social work practice or policy issue. We can also have position papers that may not be contained as the very first article within an issue, but the idea here is that it contains somebody's position or thoughts on a given topic. And these are important because it helps us think about issues from a very critical standpoint, but it may not be research. Another type of article may be a program description, where it's a summary of a service or a program in a field. These program descriptions may contain numbers, but are not necessarily empirical because it doesn't apply the scientific method. They've merely collected data on the number of participants that may have been served by a program or been affected by a given policy. And these are nice summaries for helping understand phenomena within the field, but again, it's not necessarily research. We can have theoretical articles, and these could be a critique or comparative analysis of a set of theories. Theory is very important in all aspects of research. And so theoretical articles are very important for advancing our knowledge of theory and helping us build new theory. We can also have methodological articles, and these are sort of how-to articles. And they could be contained in the area of education, practice issues, or research issues. It's very common for methodological articles to focus on issues of data analysis. And so many journal articles will have methodological articles that will describe how to perform an analysis and using various types of data. These are more of demonstration type articles and show best practices, but again, it's not empirical research. So empirical research articles are original research articles that involve the use of some type of data. And this could be qualitative or quantitative data. And identifying empirical research articles in journals is actually pretty straightforward because they follow a very specific format that we'll cover in just a moment. But before I do that, I want to draw your attention to one other very important type of article, which are considered systematic reviews or meta-analyses. These involve taking a number of empirical research articles, and this is generally speaking because we could perform systematic reviews on other ways using other types of articles. But back to my point is the idea is that we take empirical research articles on a certain topic, and we find common themes across them, and sometimes we could perform analyses across these empirical articles to help us provide a summary of a given phenomenon or an integration of knowledge. And these are very useful because it summarizes a collection of studies to date, and it's a way of informing ourselves and for social work researchers in a very efficient manner, because you don't have to go to each individual study, but instead go to a summary or an integration of the research findings. So let's come back to the idea of the empirical research articles and the structure of them as a way of identifying them in the research literature. Empirical articles follow a very specific format. The format includes an abstract, an introduction, methods, results, and discussion sections. An abstract is a summary of the article, and we can find an abstract for the other different types of articles that we've already reviewed. So this isn't a distinguishing feature. An empirical article will have an introduction where it lays out the rationale or what is known about the given phenomenon that's being studied. But this doesn't usually have a heading that offsets this particular part of the article. But what does set this article apart from the other types of articles is a section that has the methods, results, and discussion. The methods section essentially is sort of the recipe of the study. What was involved in the study in order to carry it out? It'll describe the sampling methods, the ways that the data were collected. It will describe the specific procedures for collecting the data, the measurement strategies, the data sources. So the methods section describes exactly how the study was conducted. And a good methods section will provide enough information that the study itself could be replicated by another researcher. The results section describes what was found. So if this is a study that involved quantitative data, you'll find a lot of tables with numbers that summarize the results of the study. And the results section is intended to be very descriptive and objective. So there is no elaborating on what was found. It's simply reporting the results of the study. Finally, the discussion section, this is where it integrates the findings. What do the results actually mean? And we use the discussion as an opportunity to talk about the implications of the findings. How do the results actually apply in a practice setting? How could we make practical decisions from these results? The discussion section can also talk about the implications of the research as well as the limitations of the study. No study is going to be perfect, and a good discussion section should tell you very clearly what are the limitations of the study and what are the next steps for building knowledge on the given phenomenon.